Hi, welcome to the Microsoft Partner Showcase. I'm Brian Hitney, a Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft. In this series, we're hosting technical discussions with our partners on the software industry and on their solutions. In this episode, we discuss master data management and data governance with CluedIn, a master data management platform. Tim Ward, CEO of CluedIn, provides some fantastic industry insight and delivers a compelling demo of CluedIn and how it can solve common master data management problems. We've indexed all of the chapters so you can jump to any point in the conversation or jump straight to the demo if you'd like. Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome to our Microsoft Partner Showcase. I'm Brian Hitney, a Cloud Solution Architect, joined today by my colleague Chris Mitchell. You can say hi, Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Mitchell. I'm also a Cloud Solution Architect.
Well, we decided to start this series that we call the Partner Showcase, where we would talk to some of the Microsoft partners about the solutions that they have in market and how they complement some of the Microsoft solutions that we have. And we thought a great place to start, this is our very first one, that we would start with CluedIn, which is a master data management platform that complements our Microsoft Purview really well in the cloud. So joining us today to do that is none other than Tim Ward, CEO of CluedIn. So Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself and CluedIn.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, no pressure on being the first, right? That's what they always say.
Yeah.
Guys, absolute pleasure. My background is essentially software engineering for the last 17 years. So I've always been a tinkerer. I've always had my hands on the keyboard. And for the last 7 years, I've been leading the CluedIn team, working with customers like Coca-Cola and SAP, kind of large, complex global businesses, on helping them kind of wrangle this challenge of how they kind of have data across their estate that's ready for insight. And so very much looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today.
Great. Well, I think a good place to start with the conversation is what exactly is master data management or MDM?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you were to open AI Bing this right now, right? We can say that now, right? That's the new verb, right? So essentially, I guess your Wikipedia kind of definition of it, you know, it's a 30-year-old practice, MDM. It's quite an old practice. It's been around for quite a while. And really, I guess historically, the idea was, you know, we're putting together all these data technology stacks, and a lot of the parts, the pieces of those stacks are inherently either operated or implemented by IT. So they're very kind of engineering heavy. And MDM was kind of this answer of what does the business get, right? We wouldn't want to, you know, run a sales department and, you know, have a CRM system that every time we wanted to enter a record or change values, we had to go back to IT. And MDM's kind of, you know, I guess the business's answer to how they play a role in that supply chain of getting data from that operational system to the, you know, machine learning team, generating insights, even potentially back to the operational systems in a better format. And MDM was tasked with kind of being that component within the stack. And I guess if you were to bullet list the real responsibilities of MDM, it's really about making sure the data we have within our business is clean and harmonized and, you know, has, of course, there's a lot of entropy within a business. So controlling that chaos. So whenever any downstream consumer is ready to use that data, you know, it's got rid of duplicates. And, you know, the way that people represent countries, it's, you know, not in all of these different standards that someone has to fix later on in the chain. And so MDM really inherently, you know, not only, I guess, from the market perspective, but very much from the CluedIn side of things, was really about giving the business users tools to play a role in that, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, MDM has been around for a long time now.
Yeah.
Do you think because data governance seems to be such a hot area right now,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you think data governance has evolved from MDM?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So, I mean, I always see data governance as this overarching umbrella, right? It's a practice that encapsulates many different pillars of data management, MDM just being one of them. Of course, to some degree, they are all connected to each other. And I would even go further to say that there are many pillars of data management, 30 or 40 of these, right? Data warehousing, data lakes, data privacy, security, all of these components somehow do play a piece together. But MDM and data governance, they do have a strong alignment that's maybe not as pertinent in some of these other components. So very much I'd say data governance is, to your point, a practice that has really gained a lot of notoriety and a lot of focus. And there's been some, I guess, things that have happened just in our world that have forced this on a lot of us. And of course, things like GDPR and CCPA and all the regulations around that. Of course, as you'll probably be aware, many industries have already been under these types of strict regulations for a while, like financial services and healthcare, pharma. So things like data governance is not new. It's not news to them either. So I very much see MDM, master data management, as a practice that sits under the data governance umbrella that usually does encapsulate some of the compliance and the privacy pieces. And I guess the way to differentiate it, because it's a good question to ask, because I'm sure when you're working with Microsoft customers as well, and we're working with a lot of Microsoft customers and companies, and this question comes up a lot, right? What is the difference between data governance and master data management? And do I do both at the same time? Or can I start with data governance and lead on from there? I think where the industry has come to is, if we even draw an analogy to our own lives, we have governance that we work and live by in our own lives. There's rules that we all abide by or try to abide by. And, it's our ethics and our morals that guide us to make sure we're sticking to those rules. And the idea being that if we stick to those rules, in theory, we should have less chaos, right? And this is really about applying that same thought pattern to data, in that data, as it's sprawled across the business, will have this natural chaos. And data governance is really about wrangling it in and giving it some boundaries. And there's been a huge modernization in the data governance space as well, which is pretty exciting. And I'm sure we'll get into many pieces over those in our discussion today. But I really, in the end, see MDM as, it's really about being one of those pillars of enforcing the policies that we set as a business. And data governance is, in a way, about setting those policies in place. Look, what do we, crop tech or some business, hypothetical business, what do we, how do we govern the data? What's our policies around sharing to third parties? And one of the, I guess, the thing that's so interesting about modern data governance platforms, and I'm, interested to hear from you, Chris, and you, Brian, on this as well, in your experience working with, our joint Purview customers, is a lot of these data governance platforms are being very proactive now about saying, hey, listen, although you might have your own different policies for running your business, to some degree, we all share at least a handful of policies we don't really have a choice over. We have to abide by those policies. Things like PII detection and sensitivity detection. So yeah, I'm interested to kind of hear your experience working with our joint customers on how they're interpreting data governance as well.
Yeah, great question. Great segue. I think it is a challenge because part of data governance is also about enablement and empowerment of discovering data that you have, but also trying to make sure that you're compliant and secure with that data. So they're not necessarily opposite, but they're in some ways, occasionally conflicting, right? Because you can't just open up all of your data to everybody in the organization to empower them, but at the same time, you have to have strict controls in place to make sure that the data is governed and that you're adhering to, I don't want to use the word governed while I'm describing governance, right?
Governance.
But to make sure that you're compliant, right, with all of the rules, right, our societal rules like GDPR and otherwise, anything that we happen to be restricted to, is certainly one of the challenges. Chris, go ahead. I don't know if you had more that you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I was also thinking about, in these solutions, a lot of times we have a little bit of a, and maybe it's not quite a chicken and an egg problem, but we'll have the fact that we need governance, but even a more fundamental need we have is a clear understanding of what our master data data is, and therefore when partners start implementing a data governance solution, it ends up shining a big bright light on the fact that their master data is a mess too. And so I was wondering, you Tim, if you had found that you get engaged more often when people are starting on a master data journey and they realize, oh no, we have a master data, they're starting on a data governance journey and they realize they have a master data problem, or do they start with the master data and then realize, oh, there's more to it than just master data and we need to bring in governance as well? Be curious about your perspectives there.
Yeah, so I mean, from our side, I could pull on many hands of examples of this. MDM is one of those overall categories and challenges that it kind of sometimes, at least in the past, was only relevant once you realized you had the problem, right? And because of that, often was an afterthought. But you're seeing so many people now make MDM part of their core foundation that they're putting in. And I think a lot of this is thanks to a lot of the technology we've got now is so much more proactive about letting you know more about the actual reality of your data, rather than these top-down movements where, hey, we should put in some policies around sharing data. And in theory, great idea. We definitely should do that. In some cases, we would have to do that. But if these tools are showing us that actually you don't share any data with third parties, why are we even thinking about that, right? So these tools are being much more proactive about saying, listen, I can plug into your estate and I can be much more proactive about scanning, at least as a starting point, to say, here's where the data is. With tools like Purview and CluedIn together, they can even start to say, oh, and by the way, these files have these data quality scores and these have these data quality scores. They've got these problems. And what it allows us to do as a business, and this is what I've seen from our joint customers, is they're going into the problem with open eyes. They can actually see the problems that are in front of them. And I think because of that, you're seeing a lot of people do data governance and master data management very hand in hand. If I was, if I had a gun to my head and someone said, what should we do first, the data governance pieces or the MDM? First of all, what an odd altercation to be in, right? I thought it would be maybe for my wallet eventually or something like this, but no, they're deciding on data governance or MDM. This is our world, guys. Like, this is probably, but I would argue, knowing your estate is a good place to start.
Sure.
Because MDM is often about saying, right, I need to actually know what data is available before I can help. And that's why something like Purview, with its governance and cataloging features, is a really nice accelerator to say, listen, scan these systems. I'll tell you everything you've got. That will very quickly expose you've got an MDM problem, right? In that you've got an SAP custom table called Kunda, you've got a SQL table called customer, you've got Parquet files called cust, and you've also got these other assets that aren't even called cust or customer, but they've got customers in it. And it's that immediately has people think, right, MDM has to be part of my story now.
So we're definitely getting into one of the questions I had for you, which is, what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen in implementing either MDM or data governance inside a customer environment?
MDM's had such a hard life. In that, it's a 30-year-old practice. And, if you've been following it, not a lot of modernization has happened. And if we think back at what's one of the biggest modernizations that's happened in the last 10, 15 years, I still hand on heart would say cloud, because cloud has just given us as businesses access to something that was just unachievable or improbable for us to have as businesses before. And that is the ability to say, tomorrow I need 100 computers for 10 seconds, but 10 seconds only, right? And what this has brought in is these new paradigms that have allowed, new approaches to tackling what was traditionally hard in MDM. So here's what was always hard about implementing MDM. And actually, whether this is good news or bad news, I don't know, but for me, it's good news, is that actually we've seen a parallel space kind of already solve this recently. So in the data warehousing space, I think, well, I'll ask, in my opinion, I think we've seen a pretty clear line drawn in the sand for data warehouses, where there is obviously a different ways to do it right now. There's your, I'm going to say traditional with the context that tradition doesn't mean bad. It just means that that's how we were doing it years ago, right? And you've seen these players come along like Synapse, Azure Databricks, just as examples. And they've kind of said, hey, remember how you used to build a data warehouse and, the first thing that you were asked to do is kind of build these beautiful looking models, right? These canonical enterprise-wide data models, which makes so much sense. It does, because that's how you want to operate your business. And that's still relevant that the companies want that today, and fair enough. But what these newer style of technologies did is they came along and they said, parts of the reason we did that is because we had to plan ahead. We had to say, this is what we want that thing to look like. And let's cross our fingers for the next 3 to 5 years that it stays roughly like that. Because the idea of remodeling that, there's going to be way too much impact analysis on the downstream systems, right? And these newer players came along and said, actually, because of that compute, you don't have to do that modeling so early in the supply chain of data, right? In that you can push the modeling closer to the actual use case where, you know just a little bit more about what that final data model format, indexes, schema, whatever you want to say, should look like. And that has, in a way, for me, changed the game for how to build these modern data warehouses. And that's what was always hard with traditional MDM as well, is that you would have these systems, you'd put on these big programs, they go across many parts of the business, many departments, because MDM and data governance, as you'll both know, is cross-department. Trying to solve it in one department often, well, in our case, it's not a good idea. We really try to steer our joint customers away from even starting like this. But traditionally, you had the same thing in MDM, where you would go off and choose some technology, and then often you'd turn it off for the first 6 months. Because what you'd do is you'd go out there and start asking the business, what do our customers look like? What do our vendors and suppliers and all these important domains that we use in these operational models, what do they look like? And what could you foresee them looking like over the 3 to 5 years? Because we have to commit to a model. Changing it later will probably cause too much turmoil. We might have to go back and start again. And the cloud has changed that for MDM as well. We're in a similar type of approach. What we're seeing with modern MDM platforms like CluedIn today is that modeling is more done on what you say egress out of the platform, in that we're giving our data so much more of a chance to fit into that canonical model, because we don't have these rigid, tight expectations on, for you to come in, you have to look like this. You have to, if you're an age, you have to be a number. And if you're not, back to IT to fix that. And that was if we go back to the original definition, this was supposed to be a tool for the business, right? And you've instantly made that an IT problem where, oh, it's because of their ETL pipeline was not transforming what was someone spelling out the word for instead of putting the number 4. That's been caught up in an IT pipeline now. And what this has changed is now, no, onboard it into a softer landing space. And at that point, you start to realize, oh, that's a powerful MDM system because it's actually helping me with that supply chain instead of being saying, no, it's Fort Knox here. And that's what was always tricky about implementing MDM. And as I kind of yield back to you, I'd love to hear your insight on it as well. I don't think we should undersell the idea that data governance in general is still tricky. It's an ambitious thing to crack because it's not typically just something buried off in IT that you can kind of hand them and say, listen, we'll have something, we'll operate on a daily basis. And this is an operational that not only encapsulates the technology, but you've got to have steer codes, you've got to have decisions around standards that in the end could really affect the operation of the business. But very interested to hear what your guys' experience is.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, one of the things that was interesting just about that little piece you were talking there about the end, about like the age being entered as text instead of a number and so forth. Mm-hmm. You know, my experience here is a lot of times MDM really kind of fell into 2 disciplines. One of them was the management orchestration piece of it, which I'd say more of the, hey, we've got 2 records for this customer, which one's the right one type of thing. Yeah. So a lot more on the deduplication and maybe business processes surrounding that, so that you could have a single place to go for what's the unified definition of a customer, right? That's already, and then there's another element of it, which is like data quality, right? And a lot of times the data quality side of it, I'll use a more complicated example than just age, might be things like, hey, we have a customer and the customer has given us an address. Is this address actually a real address, or is it gibberish, like 123 Easy Street or something like that, right? And you might connect to like Melissa data or something like that in order to do address validation or phone number validation. And so a lot of times, those 2 have been separate disciplines. Like, how do I handle and make sure that the data that I have is appropriately formatted versus how do I do conflict resolution when I have 2 records that define what customer A is, Acme Corp. I have 2 different records for Acme Corp, and they don't agree with each other. Which one's right? Right? How do I resolve that? And which is more which I had thought of more as the management side of this broader discipline.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is we're on the same page. And Brian, before I'd love to just throw in a couple of sentences here because it's such a good example. Is you could argue, okay, but why can't IT just solve that for example as well? Sure. This is this divergence that we're talking about. This is a really good point in that often more than just can they is should they solve this, because the kind of examples you're giving with addresses, and by the way, thanks a lot, Chris, for giving away my address. Now everyone knows I live on 123 Easy Street. But
I wish we all did.
So some of these challenges are very hard to solve from an engineering perspective. And when we get to a part of the demonstration, I'll give you a perfect example of something that's actually quite hard to solve from an automated perspective, and therefore needs some type of augmented operational system to manage it, right? And the other thing is, we've really got to ask ourselves not only can, but like, should they fix that particular problem? Because if we're always having to go back to IT to say, here's another address, guys, and this time they put the 123 at the end, can you go off and fix that? It's like, now you exactly know why MDM exists. Yep. You know why MDM exists because in the data supply chain, there will be a fork that will happen. There'll be a fork that goes through your classic even ETL pipelines or Jupyter notebooks or scripts or whatever, and that'll be handled by IT and engineering. Fantastic. That's for things we can automate. So for example, things like I want to detect if this website is actually a valid URL as well. That is a known science. We can hand that off to the engineering team. They can build a pipeline that just parses that and says, spits out the end, no, it's not even a valid URL. There's no need for a human to come in and say, yes, yes, yes. But all these things like addresses, well, from a technology standpoint, you also have to realize that a lot of the time you're going to have to reach out to third-party services to do this. And just from a strictly engineering perspective, that idea breaks a lot of these modern paradigms we have as well. These modern paradigms are about essentially loading this data into memory, often distributed across a cluster, and saying, go. The idea of saying, oh, and on every record, I'm going to call out to a service. Your performance is dead. Your performance is dead. That Spark job that was running for 14 seconds now suffers from any other system that has to go to the network to go and get data, right? And therefore, that's just another example where you go, oh, wait, that's why MDM exists. Because there's these other operational things that we have to do on the data pipeline that will either need human eyes or will need lookups or a little bit more time to think about. And my final input on this is the examples you're talking about are probably the best examples I know of where IT should definitely not fix it. And because there could actually be a business knock-on effect from us in IT saying, go with that email address, it looks nicer, right? And it could be the difference between an info@microsoft.com and a procurement at microsoft.com. And, which one do we put into the golden record? IT says, info, because I've seen other companies use info, so let's just do that. And so what happens in reality? Well, what happens in reality is someone says, I sent customer X an invoice and they're not answering and they haven't paid. And then you ring up customer X, well, sorry guys, like you have a bill. Well, I don't have an email. Well, we sent it to info@companyx.com or whatever it is. It's like, well, that's not where you're supposed. It's supposed to be a procurement, right? And so suddenly you've got a cash flow issue because you probably can't force them or tell them, sorry, guys, that was our issue, but you have to pay today because you have 30 days notice. No, probably what's happening is here's another 30 days notice. So there are challenges with data that whether we've experienced or not have real knock-on effects in the business. So Chris, it was a great example.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think one of the things that you're getting at is about, I think, IT in implementing policy, right? Because one of my favorite definitions of data governance is the collaboration between the people, the process, and the technology, right? Because technology can solve a lot of this, but you also need to have the right people and the policies in place to, what do you do when there's a disagreement between an email address or some other record? How do you handle that? And technology has come a really long way in doing that, but you have to have that framework in place in order to help support that. So having said that, though, I think we've talked a little bit about some of these very common scenarios with mismatched data and data flowing through, especially, and it's especially relevant today because data is coming from so many different disparate sources, right? And what is CluedIn's approach to handling data? Like, can you walk us through maybe some of the how you would approach that very specifically as a user of CluedIn?
Yeah, so it's a good question because we often at CluedIn will say here, we don't look like a traditional MDM system. And tradition, like I said before, in my mind, it's never a bad thing. It's just, every now and then you have a solution that comes along that tries to attack the problem at a different angle, right? And fortunately, we've been, we're a 7-year-old company. So fortunately, we were kind of born when Azure had matured, right? I mean, it's so odd to think that Azure was actually only released like 12 years ago, right? It feels longer than that. And these things, they take time to mature and get all the functionality and services that are needed. So we were always fortunate enough that we were born with that infrastructure. And what that's allowed us to do is, study, I would say, a good 23 years of implementing MDM, realizing that, according to the analysts, the failure rates of these MDM projects are catastrophic. Like, they are nothing like you would have in other spaces. This year, it's a good year, believe it or not, and the failure rate is 75% from Gartner. That's a good year. That's the best over the last 3 years. And for me, that's a very clear indication we can't do this the same way anymore. We cannot do this the same way. It is not working. And I guess, fortunately, the cloud has been there to say, I'm a big proponent in being able to allow you to take different approaches. And so I think to understand what CluedIn has brought to the Microsoft ecosystem in regards to MDM, of course, it's always good to contrast it back to, okay, so what was hard, right, about doing it before? And we've already touched on the fact that upfront modeling was really complex because you were trying to do too many things at the same time. You had to build an amazing looking model that the business operated off. And then you had to fit your current data into that model. And then you had to cross your fingers that for the next 3 to 5 years for you to get a good ROI on the technology and the project that you've put together, that I hope for the next 3 to 5 years, all our new data fits in to that as well. All the new systems that we acquire, all the companies that we might acquire as well. And so I'd say the biggest shift that CluedIn has done in the MDM space is probably analogous to what the Lake did. What the Lake did is it said, instead of having you have an ETL tool that's supposed to extract, load, and transform, I'm going to provide you with something that's basically just a landing zone for data that scales. And don't transform data there, because then you're overcomplicating one piece of the stack. Just keep it simple, onboard data, put it in the same format, categorize it a little bit, job done, right? And what that meant is moving from left to right in that classic enterprise architecture diagram suddenly became a little bit more achievable. And it's so the Lake is just about moving data from the operational systems into a common format and place, and maybe having a schedule to get delta loads or something like that on a daily basis. Done. That's done. What CluedIn has done for MDM is, I would say, relatively similar, where it's saying, right, the next step from getting data from the Lake into your MDM system to process is also not a big complex jump. It's smaller, easily consumable chunks, because what there was before is, wait a second, before you come in, remember, I'm Fort Knox. We said before you come in, you have to look like this. And that's where things really didn't go well, in that, and to some degrees, it would put you into this false sense of security where, you'd be going off, you'd be modeling the data, you'd build these beautiful looking models, the business would tick it off and say, that looks great. And, for all we know, the project's going really well because we've got a model in place and the business has signed off and it should be searchable and the reports will run off it great. And then that's when the rubber hits the road, when you come back to actually fit your world into this new defined model. And what CluedIn's basically said is, at a very high level, this is not schema on entry, this is schema on exit. And that has, like the Lake has done, is it's not only said, MDM's not really scary. It's not as scary actually anymore, because the first step in my MDM project is something rather simple to consume, which is to push the data in all its gnarled formats with its horrible looking data and its denormalized models from different systems and people shoving email addresses in the phone number column. Come on in, because I'm a place that will tell you this doesn't look right. that proactive nature of it, right? Give me the data, let me have a look. And think about what we were doing before. We were saying, don't come in so I can't start. And what that meant is that these MDM projects, they typically took so long and they were so waterfall in nature, because before you could even start on some of the things Chris talked about, like deduplication, you can't start until the data fits into the model. And that took a while. And what CluedIn and these modern MDM systems do is they say, no, bring on the data, and actually 80% of that data is good. Let's get it out. And I'm not going to put this rigid type expectations on the data in entry just based off the 20% that somehow didn't fit into that. Oh, and by the way, I'll give you some tools to fix that as well as business users. That's, I guess, overall the biggest thing that CluedIn has added to that technology stack. And I'll just finish with this. The fact that we integrate into the rest of the Azure stack has simplified that story as well. Not only because CluedIn feels familiar. If you're using Dynamics, if you're using Purview, Azure Data Factory, Synapse, it feels familiar, right? And it fits nicely into this overall stack of saying, I'm going to stick to what MDM is responsible for, and I'm going to depend on these other guys out here to tell me what data we have and tell me what PII data there is, to do reporting, to Chris's point as well, to set up business processes. There's a great business process tool called Power Automate. Like, let's use that to provide that familiarity as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Why don't we let's jump into a demo and see it in action?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So today I'm going to take you through a pretty familiar scenario for most companies. And speaking of which, you should see a pretty familiar tool on your screen right now. So classic report. This is, just so you know, this is the only report that we run CluedIn off this pie chart. So, so we've got a problem here, right? In that the first problem is, at first look, this is a good looking pie chart. There's some even distribution until we start to actually look into the data. So this is a breakdown of all the job titles we have on employees, right? And this data is coming from across multiple systems. And on closer inspection into the data, you can actually see, using this little legend over here, oh, wait a second. People are spelling accounting different in different systems. Sometimes it's in different languages. And this is just expected of global businesses, right? CluedIn is a Danish company, so a lot of our content's in Danish. We're pretty global, as is Microsoft. The same thing is going to happen where there's different permutations of this challenge. This is an example of something that's actually hard to fix as an engineer. Of course, we could all fix this small sample here because we've only got 10 records. We could write a nice switch statement that just says, if it's this, then do this. If it's this, then do this. Not scalable at all, right? Definitely not operational in that when a new permutation comes up, what are we going to do? So this is the problem, right? And you can imagine why people lose trust as downstream consumers. And not all of them are as vocal as others, right? Some will just stop using the report and go off and build their own report, or they won't even do anything, right? Some will say, and I guess these are the good examples, is someone will actually put up their hand and say, well, I'm not using that report. Look at it. Would you use that data? And so let's trace it back from here with the MIDP stack, with data governance, with CluedIn, how we can patch this problem pretty easily. So over here, I've got a couple of tools. So I've got Microsoft Purview, and this is because for me to start, wouldn't it be nice to trace back from Power BI where that data is actually coming from in the first place, right? Because as an end user, maybe I'm in the MDM team. I'm not in the BI team, so I don't know that report. Now, the good thing is, Power BI, Purview, of course, does allow us to set up these automated scans, register systems like Power BI, like the container storage where actually all this data is located. And because of that, purviews actually can tell us in their lineage, right, this report comes eventually back from these 3 files. Great, right? So in this particular case, Purview is going to tell us that this data is coming from 3 different files, right, in our container storage. And so that's great, but where did things go wrong along the way? Why is IT not fixing this data? And you can start to see why something like MDM could be introduced in the pipe to say, well, maybe I can help with those problems. So very similar to all the Azure stack, getting started with your MDM system is as easy as getting started with Purview. Heading to the Azure portal or the Azure Marketplace, type in Master Data Management up the top, type in CluedIn up the top, and you'll find here in the Marketplace, you can install CluedIn directly inside your own tenant. So we're talking about data governance here, guys. So sovereignty, important. This is installed in your environment as a customer, right? It's not a, hey, we're going to send all our most important data off to CluedIn and Microsoft. No. It's in your Azure tenant, and it's a managed service just like Purview. So don't worry about security updates, patches, maintenance, upgrades. Someone else has taken care of all that. Focus on the actual data governance pieces. So you can install this, and even from the install, you can kind of tell this tool's pretty native to Microsoft Azure. It's integrating with all the pieces that I would want. Things like the data lake for getting access to the actual raw data, Purview, of course, things like Azure Data Factory for movement of data, so on and so on. So I thought I'd do you both a favor and not watch an install for 15 minutes. Or we can do that if you'd like. But I've spun up an instance here before, and I've got a blank canvas install of CluedIn. And I mean, not to kind of rub it in, but the familiarity is there, right? It feels like an Azure native tool, right? So let's head in, and what I'm going to do is, obviously the first thing you would want to start in an MDM project is, let's start with the data. Well, isn't that odd? Because that's not what you did before. What you did before was turn this off. And you said, let's go get our database modeling tools out, because there's going to be employees that are going to come on. So I need a table, and I need indexes, and I need schemas, and I need types, and all of that stuff, right? Still good, but there's no need to do it this early on in the actual supply chain of data. So you might think, right, let's start with data then. Okay, let's get some files or databases. Let's actually connect to live SaaS systems. Now, because of the integration with Purview, there's a much easier way to consume this now. So I'm going to head over to my administrative settings, and we're going to head down to our Purview settings, and I'm going to turn on 2 things. So this is a native integration that just ships out when you install. You get this, ships out of the box. And I'm going to ask CluedIn to do 2 things. I'm going to ask it to sync its data sources. And the next thing is I'm going to ask it to poll the data sources. And what this is going to do is it's going to go off and talk to Purview, and it's going to say, can you please let me know all the assets that you've registered, right? Because your lineage is telling me there's 3 files this data came from: employees.csv, persons.csv, context.csv. That's a good place for me to start to kind of plumb into. And, oh, by the way, every 30 seconds, I'm going to check for new assets. So really, there's a close to real-time pulse that we have on new assets that are coming into our business, into the platform. So if we head over to our data sources, we can see that a couple of assets are now in our data sources section. And in particular, it's some of these files that were fueling that report that we saw before. And so let's dive into the first set of data. Let's go to this Experian folder. And under here, this is interesting because in Purview, that's a metadata store. So we know that there is a file called contacts.csv. But now we're actually looking at the records, right? Because when we're starting to master data, we need to go down to this level. We need to go down and say, well, actually need to see Lorraine and Jane and so forth. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And on the right-hand side, we can already see our challenge here, that there's that job field that had that bad data in it. And like, I guess, in engineering, the hardest thing to always choose is names of your variables. And for the data people, it's the names of tables and columns and things like this. And so this is essentially, I guess, the hardest decision that we need to make is what are we talking about here? Is it employees? Is it contacts? Is it people? Is it persons? And the good thing is that there's all these accelerators that Microsoft has. So for example, if I start to type in something like person, you can see that there's already these concepts coming up here of a person, right? This is me saying this is a person, that's the domain that we're working with. And the other thing we need to choose is essentially the structure. Now, I use the word structure on purpose because this is not a schema that we're choosing. But if we were to type in something like person here, notice that all of these existing models coming up, including one logo that's pretty familiar to everybody, the Dataverse logo, right? So CluedIn ships with the common data model. And these are ways to say, you know what? The world has already described what a doctor looks like and a hospital looks like. And we've already got an idea of what that looks like. You can use these as accelerators. So I'm going to go off and do that. And because of that, the first challenge, I have this kind of augmentation where, hey, yes, you had a field called first_name, but I've actually already found a field very similar in the existing model. Can I just map the semantics so we're all speaking the same language? So we don't have multiple columns to describe a first name. Of course, yes, let's go off and do that. So after we've created the mapping, it's going to show us this nice lineage. And CluedIn's going to go off and start to identify a couple of things. It's going to identify unique values. Let's go back to our preview just to kind of inspect the data. We've got this column called ID, and we've got this column called email. Well, it's safe to say those could be both used as values to identify Lorraine and Omar and Kristen. So what we can do is we can just go in and have a look what the platform's doing. So this is the transformation of mapping of column names. And in the next, it's done a pretty good job at detecting that both the email and ID can both be used as ways to uniquely represent these people. I will change one thing in that when I'm representing these records, I'd rather show the full name of the person instead of the first name. And once I've done that, I can now push this into the platform. So right now, there's no Lorraines in the system. There's just the records that come out of the box with CluedIn. Once I'm happy with my mapping, I can go ahead and process this data into the platform. So this is going to now say, what was a CSV file in the container storage that Purview told me about, I'm now going to turn it into 10 people with property. So now we're going to deal with the data on a record level. So if we head over to our instance, great, we've got Lorraine coming in here. We can go in and take a look at her unified single record, where our data quality metrics will start to kick in as the data continues to process. But we still have not fixed our problem. So let's go and set up what we call an export target to get data out of the platform. I'm going to set it up to our SQL Server database because that's where that Power BI report is running. This will also be the hard part if I can remember my password. It looks good. And now we've got this as a place where we can send data after it's been mastered, right? Because what we're wanting to do is plumb this in to the scenario. And for that, I'm going to set up a live stream of data, and we're going to call this, we can call this anything. And we need to tell the system three things. We need to say, well, what data are you actually wanting to share? And in this case, I'm going to do something simple. I'm going to say where the type of data is equal to that person domain. And this is one of the great things about MDM is we're going to start not talking about files and tables anymore. We want to talk about people and customers and actual domains. We're going to choose where we're going to send the data. So let's send this. And we can go ahead and save that guy. And there's a couple of things we've done here. First of all, we've said we want to share it with that SQL Server database. Actually, I want to add a column in here. And the next thing we need to do is tell it what data we're actually wanting to push out. So there was that column called person.job. Let's go ahead and save that, confirm, and turn that guy on. So we can get a preview of the data and we can see that, hey, great, you've onboarded the data into the MDM platform, you've pushed it out, but you haven't solved a single thing here, right? I've still got those problems. Let's go off and wire this back up. So I'm going to get rid of this old data source that had the bad data in it that no one was trusting. And I'm going to ship this off to the SQL database instead. So let's go and do that. Now, there should be a table now in the SQL database called PAL that I should be able to use. So let's go there. Let's go to training. Let's go to PAL. And sure enough, I've got 10 records out there, still horrible names. Let's load that in and rewire up our report. We probably should expect that nothing's actually been fixed. I would expect the same type of pie chart. But the good thing is we've now plumbed MDM in. So I'm hoping I can go back into the MDM system and crack this without code, without involving IT. So let's go and close these guys off. Let's get our job back onto our Power BI, and nothing's really changed. I'm going to set this guy to page refresh, and I'm going to do it every, I don't know, every 3 seconds, just to show that what we're dealing with here is actually live real-time data. So as we fix the data, there's no need to publish changes. There's no need for someone to take a daily sync or anything like this. We're going to head back in, about 2 minutes left in the demonstration. So we're going to head back in and we're going to head over to our cleaning tools, where as a business user, I'm going to fix job titles. Now, what am I wanting to fix? Let's go fix where the type of data equals that person. And you can probably imagine that the first problem that I'm going to come up against is to find the actual data quality issues. Obviously, we're dealing with a small amount of data, so you'll be able to easily see it with your eyes. But you know, you're going to have you might have a million records. It's going to be impossible to actually find where the actual data quality problems are. And then the second thing that's going to be hard is, all right, well, how do we fix it? Should it be the English spelling? Should it be the Danish spelling? Like, what are we going to normalize these values to? This is something, as I said before, usually we would hand off to IT, but this is really hard. And we join that classic IT queue that's growing and growing on a daily basis. So with this in mind, we're going to go off and clean this data. And first of all, we're going to ask CluedIn to use a feature called clustering. And what this will do is we'll use all of these different techniques to actually say, see all these? They should be that. And see these? Yeah, I know they sound the same. They should be this. So as a business user, I can basically reinforce I like what it's done. And different techniques will bring up different challenges. Our data looks pretty clean now. And so we're going to go ahead and process that data. Notice this is asking me to enable rules. So this is smart because what it will do is 3 things. First of all, it'll fix those values in the MDM platform. Secondly, if I head over to my Power BI, everything's fixed. And finally, if I head back to the CluedIn platform and head over to my rules engine, look what it did a couple of seconds ago. It automatically wrote that switch statement that we thought we might have had to build and manage all for me automatically. where if the person's job is ever this or this or this, then change this to accounting. So that is what MDM can do for customers. Simple to get started with, simple to plumb in, agile in nature that we don't need to fix everything to actually start benefiting from our data. And hope that was a good show.
That's a compelling demonstration, and that's something that I've seen in a lot of installations, right? That happens quite a bit. In terms of taking that now to the next level, right? Because it's one thing to see it in a demo, but then it's another to say, well, how do I get hands-on with something like that myself? I understand that you've been working on some training material. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So just hot off the press that at the end of February, in 2023, we've got our Microsoft Learn module going live where, as end users, you can step in, have your hands on the keyboard, start working through these challenges. We have a 7-day trial that anyone can log on to today. Head to the marketplace and spin up in your own environment as well. So you can learn, you can plumb this in like you just saw before. But I think that learning module is going to be the best way to also piece together the other parts of the stack, because MDM in the end is one component out of many that are necessary, and the Microsoft Learn will take you through the Purview pieces, it'll take you through the CluedIn pieces, the container storage, you name it.
Fantastic. No, that's a great demo, and it was a really great conversation. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Chris, I don't know if you had any closing thoughts you wanted to offer?
No, I think it was great to see it in action, and I think it really solves an important business problem and an important gap in our offering right now. So I'm really excited to see you getting the MS Learn modules in addition to the ease of implementation and bringing it into our customer and partner solutions. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. A great conversation, and thanks for being a willing participant in our first partner showcase video. Hope to have more of these in the future, and I look forward to getting my hands on with that MS Learn module myself. On behalf of Chris and myself, thank you again for taking the time today to talk to us, and thank you everybody for watching. Appreciate it.